2 out of 3 Alzheimer's disease cases are female. Women are disproportionately more affected than men. I think every woman should be taking it.
I am Dr. Kristen Holm. Louisa Nicola is a neurophysiologist on a mission to end Alzheimer's disease.
What is normal in terms of brain age?
As we get older, we lose different functions in our brain. Alzheimer's disease is the only disease that robs you of who you are. What is not spoken about is that Alzheimer's disease is not part of the brain aging process. Around 97% of cases are preventable. There are many things that cause it, and it comes down to you're setting yourself up for failure if you're in a sleep-deprived state.
What else besides sleep is fundamental?
Getting really strong on exercise, hormone replacement therapy. And diet is probably the best diet. The more you have, the better the brain health. This will impress people. If you have this, you are protected.
If you change your life, you can prevent
Cognitive decline. The good news is
The more of you that hit like down below and subscribe to the channel, the more we can grow this community and bring even more enlightening topics and conversations your way. Your support is so appreciated. Thank you.
I'd love to understand, do we have a sense of like what is normal versus what is abnormal in terms of brain age?
for a year, I worked in a neurology clinic where I was tasked with the mission of just doing brain scans picking up on early cognitive decline. What we would do is we would do an EEG and a QEEG, amongst some other tests, a memory test, etc. And we would put this person, whether they were 57 or 97, against what we call a normative database. We would compare them to millions of people in that population group. And we would be able to assess what is normal aging, what is healthy aging. So unfortunately, as we get older, we do tend to lose different functions in our brain. What is not spoken about is the fact that cognitive decline and gray matter volume, per se, you're not losing neurons. Your neurons don't die off. What ends up happening is the connections between these neurons die off. So maybe at one stage you had 10 to 15,000 connections. Maybe the dendrites just aren't healthy enough to connect to other neurons anymore. So maybe they've only got 1,000 connections. And then maybe they've got no connections. So it's not the neurons themselves that are actually dying off. Because if that was happening, then our brain would really get smaller. The brain does shrink when we look at it on MRIs, but the shrinking as you age, but that is because of the dendrites that are not connecting to one another. Yeah, the connections.
So how do we preserve the health of our dendrites?
Well, how do we preserve the connections?
The connections.
Yeah. So let's talk about dementia, because that's what we're really getting into here. Yeah. So dementia is the umbrella term that we use. It's pretty much demented states. It's where the word comes from. It's basically a set of dysfunctional systems in the brain that result in cognitive decline. That is what dementia is.
And people can search that all-type dementia.
Yes.
Because that's what,
it's
to
just
distinguish from, Alzheimer's and things like that.
Yeah, but so then underneath the umbrella of dementia, you've got Parkinson's dementia. That is cognitive decline that occurs due to Parkinson's disease. You've got frontotemporal dementia, which is an aggressive form of dementia, really sad. I believe Robin Williams had this, which is a bit of Alzheimer's disease, a bit of schizophrenia, a bit of bipolar. It's really sad and scary. We can detect this, though, with certain genes. You've got Alzheimer's disease as well. We've got Lewy body dementia. And then Alzheimer's disease is the one that everyone thinks their grandmother had. Anyway, so Alzheimer's disease is the one that's affecting most people out of all of the dementias. Currently, 55 million people worldwide have the disease. Jeez. The number is going to triple by the year 2050. Women are disproportionately more affected than men. 2 out of 3 Alzheimer's disease cases are female. The good news is, and the reason for my entire existence, is the fact that around 97% of Alzheimer's disease cases are preventable.
Okay, let's just... 97% of Alzheimer's cases are preventable. 97%.
Yeah, it's quite scary because most people think that Alzheimer's disease is a disease that when you're diagnosed, you get it. It's a disease of the old age. It's just going to happen to me. But it is not part of the brain aging process. It is definitely not a foregone conclusion that you're going to get it.
That's your reason for being.
Yes.
Is to just help people understand that if you change your life, you can position yourself to prevent this disease.
Yeah.
So,
My mission in this life is to live in a world where dementia doesn't exist. Well, Alzheimer's disease doesn't exist. That is because I spent so much time in hospitals, and I still do. Now I'm more involved in neuro-oncological cases. I do a lot of, I'm going into brain tumors, glioblastomas, but I do still spend a lot of time with caregivers, which really pains me. The cost, by the way, it's going to be such a huge economic burden. It's going to be the collapse of our healthcare system in the US in 2050. I see what it causes to loved ones. I see what it causes to the person affected by it.
Yeah.
I think that the moment that really struck me was when I was actually dealing with a patient, and she was only 55, and she had early signs of cognitive impairment. But there was one day where she didn't know who she was. And if we spend our whole lives looking for ourselves, doing self-discovery, Alzheimer's disease is the only disease that robs you of who you are. It robs you of your chance of communicating with your significant other, of knowing who your children are. The children have to take the burden of losing their parent, because that's what it is. It's a death. Your mother doesn't know you anymore.
Yeah.
So you have to say goodbye to that. So that's my mission.
Yeah.
So we've got around 3% of the cases are driven through genes. So there is 3 genes that are involved in the disease. There's around 20 genes, but the 3 ones that are really meaning that if you have these genes, then you will get some form of dementia. And that is presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and the amyloid precursor protein. Just like if you've got a mutation on chromosome 4, you will get Huntington's disease. So this is just your genetic makeup, right? But putting those aside, that's responsible for 3% of the total cases. Then we talk about, well, Louisa, why do all of these other people have Alzheimer's disease? What is causing this disease if it's not genetics? There are many things that cause it, and it comes down to the way that we live our life. I've been studying this disease for almost a decade now, and I'm still going, and I'm still publishing, which I know that you know a lot about, which is very hard. It's very tedious. So I'm both in clinical settings seeing patients, I'm both in the research. What I've nailed it down to is I believe the root cause of this is metabolic dysfunction. We've got 2 hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. We've got amyloid beta. This used to be what people would call we used to call Alzheimer's disease the amyloid cascade hypothesis. People would demonize amyloid. But we now know in 2025 that amyloid is not the demon right now. So that is one biomarker of Alzheimer's disease. When amyloid builds up in the brain, it accumulates, it forms these plaques, these rocks. That is what gets in between of the neurons connecting with each other. So amyloid exists outside of the neuron. Okay, so the amyloid builds up in our brain, these toxic proteins. It is a protein, it builds up, it's not toxic though. And if we don't clear it away throughout the day or the night, then it just stays there. More amyloid builds up and it clumps together. And then if it clumps together outside of the neurons, the network can't seem to connect with one another.
Right.
So it gets in the way. So then if there's no use for the dendrites, then what are they going to do? If they're not going to be signaling and synapsing with one another, they basically say this network is like, let's die down. She doesn't need us. That's how your brain operates. If you don't use certain areas of the brain, it just dies off because it's like, I'm only here for survival and reproduction. If you don't need me, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to die. The next toxic protein that builds up is tau, and that's phosphorylated tau. Now, tau happens in the microtubule space of the axons. So it builds up. We've got microtubules, which are like train tracks. Okay. Actually, if you really look at it deep, it's like a roller coaster. You know those? So, and that's how we process information. So what happens is once the tau accumulates in the axon, it phosphorylates and it causes a breakdown of that axon. So then we don't get, what do we not get? We don't get information processing speed. So that means like a delay in seeing a cup, a delay in responding to somebody else. So these are the 2 toxic proteins that build up. That's what we know now.
Okay.
But then you've got another gene, which everybody knows about, called apolipoprotein E. Okay, so if you are a genetic, so we get one allele from mum, one allele from dad, and the apolipoprotein E gene we all have. But there's 3 main variants of it. So you've got APOE2, APOE3, and APOE4. So you're either going to get 2 of each or 1 of one and 1 of the other, right? So APOE2 is the protective gene. It actually protects the neurons. So if we have this, very rarely is there an E2. But if you have this, maybe you've got APOE2 and APOE3. If you have this, you are protected. So it basically protects you. It's like a shield for your neurons. If you are an APOE3 carrier, APOE3, 3 is part of the average. It's a null. It doesn't help you. It also doesn't accelerate you.
Okay.
So it doesn't do anything. It just stays there. I have been genetically tested. I'm an E3. So E3 from mum, E3 from dad.
Okay. So you're neutral.
Neutral, yeah. Which is good. I like that because that means I have to suffer my own consequences.
Yeah.
Right? Then you've got E4, and that's the one that raises your risk of getting the disease. And that's just due to lipid metabolism because it's involved in cholesterol transport. So if you are an E4 carrier, it raises your risk by 2 times. If you've got 1 APOE4 gene, if you've got 2 E4, which is what Chris Hemsworth has, it raises your risk by about 10 to 12 times.
Okay. So you are, in those cases, do you just have to double down on lifestyle?
Yeah.
Or is it inevitable?
It depends on who the person is. It's not inevitable.
Okay.
No, it's a risk factor gene.
Okay.
Doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Right.
We have seen in populations in Africa where people have 2 of the alleles, APOE4, and they don't get Alzheimer's disease. They don't even get cognitive impairment.
Wow.
We've also got brains that are full of amyloid that don't get cognitive dysfunction, and we'll talk about why that is as well.
Yeah.
So it's not a foregone conclusion if you have the APOE4 gene. It just raises your risk. So what would somebody like me do? Well, I probably wouldn't change my lifestyle at all because I already live my life as if like I am an APOE4 carrier, really. Yeah. But if you are, probably the best thing you could do is go aggressive. The first thing I would do would be aggressive on my lipids, looking at lowering triglycerides, being really lowering ApoB, like being really cognizant of that, and then getting really strong on exercise, right? We'll talk about that later. So we've got the ApoE4 genes, we've got the amyloid beta, we've got tau proteins. Now, amyloid beta, I mentioned earlier, it is an antimicrobial peptide. What does that mean? It means that in response to stress, when your brain feels like it's under attack, it activates the innate immune system, so our first line of defense, and then the innate immune system in the brain is like, hey, I'm under stress. It triggers amyloid to be released because amyloid protects the neurons, right? So the microglia, which is part of the glial network, which is our chief immunity brain cell, basically says, Louisa's under attack, let's shield the neurons and protect her. So amyloid is up, right? But what happens is if we don't clear out the amyloid through sleep or through just staying not stressed and engaging in meditation, deep sleep, etc., it stays there. And that's how it gets clumped up. And it stays in the cerebral spinal fluid. And that's what causes amyloid buildup.
So deeper stages of sleep, REM, solid sleep, are the time point where you're going to be able to release a majority of those toxins.
Yes, because during deep slow wave sleep, not REM sleep, deep slow wave sleep, these glial cells, as I mentioned, the glial cells, we've got more of them than neurons, but they shrink in size and they allow for the cerebral spinal fluid to basically flush out the brain. So you flush out the brain just like a washing machine. We flush it all out, we wake up and we feel great. But if you don't get into deep slow wave sleep, then we're not going to activate the glymphatic system. But don't forget, we've also got impairments in our microglia. So if those microglial glial cells break down or become dysfunctional, then that also doesn't aid in flushing out the toxic proteins. Yeah.
Got it. Jeez. When we think about amyloid and kind of clearing out those toxins, like what else besides sleep is fundamental?
So why is the brain filling up with amyloid to begin with? As I mentioned, we get stressed or we're under stress, your brain feels attacked. Why does it feel attacked? Why are we under stress? Why is it releasing these pro-inflammatory cytokines? Well, that comes down to sleep deprivation. If you're in a sleep-deprived state, your brain has to work overtime the following day to just maintain homeostasis, really. So you're setting yourself up for failure if you're in a sleep-deprived state. Glucose metabolism. Whether we like it or not, the primary fuel source of the brain is glucose. It works more efficiently if it's taking lactate and ketones, right? Which is why a ketogenic diet is very favorable for the brain. That's one thing. Obesity is a risk factor. Not exercising. Exercise is an amazing clearance mechanism of amyloid. We've seen that omega-3 fatty acids at 2 grams of each per day, so 2 grams of EPA, 2 grams of DHA per day can actually clear out some amyloid as well. So maintaining that lifestyle, but we have to figure out what is driving it. Why are you getting inflamed? Why are you getting stressed?
Yeah. So if people were to do a self-diagnosis and just without obviously a brain scan to know exactly what's going on, if they are chronically sleep deprived, if they are chronically sedentary, those would be 2 of the biggest risk factors for this buildup that you're talking about.
Yep. Sedentary behavior is a disease.
So let's say I've got massive amounts of buildup because I've been, deprived of sleep and, chronically deprived of sleep and relatively sedentary. If I kind of get on a better track, am I going to be able to undo that damage?
It depends how far along the way. Like I said to you, so you've got Alzheimer's disease. Think of Alzheimer's disease diagnosis as end-stage cancer, stage 4 cancer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to go through stage 1, stage 2. So stage 1 cancer is, we can look at it, we can detect it, maybe we can cut it out, maybe you can take a short, you can get rid of that. It's when it metastasizes that becomes a problem. So stage 1 is literally, this is happening in terms of cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is what we call it, or subjective cognitive impairment is like stage 1 cancer. That's at this. So if you have been diagnosed at subjective cognitive impairment, you can definitely go on a really rigorous routine and reverse that. But this process takes 30 years. So you've got subjective cognitive impairment, which happens for about 5 to 10 years. Then you've got mild cognitive impairment. That's a 20-year process. Generally, we're seeing folks in their 40s to their 60s in that stage.
So basically, 20 to 30, you can, how you live is setting the stage for basically 30 to 50 in terms of how you progress through. So let's say, 20 to 30, you're just a disaster in terms of like your lifestyle and everything. And then you kind of dialed it in 30 to 50.
Yeah.
You're probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then during that stage, which will go into the life cycle, you've got hormonal disruptions, you've got the introduction maybe of children, which take up, what I've heard is sleep deprived state, because anytime I put something out about sleep, I get attack of the mothers. Right?
I know, I get that too. I'm like, I have 2 kids. Yeah. I understand. Yeah, it's transient.
Yeah.
But I think what happens, with mothers is they don't actually ever get back on track.
Yeah.
So they kind of get into this state where they are disrupted with their sleep, and which is totally normal. But then their kids get on track, but they don't get back on track. And that's, I think, where, our health can really decline pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
If we don't get ourselves back on track.
And by the way, I'm not sitting here. I never sell an easy idea. This is hard.
Yeah.
It is so hard. I travel so often. It is hard for me. And I'm mid-30s, so I'm young. But sometimes I had to get on a flight this morning, right? And so it's a very hard process. Don't get me wrong. I'm just telling people the facts of it. So yes, you can reverse it. So you've got subjective cognitive decline, mild cognitive impairment. That's the pre-dementia state. Then bang, you've lived your life like this for 20 years. Your brain has given up. That's what your brain basically says. Okay, you win. I give up. Boom. And that's Alzheimer's.
Talk through the symptoms. So what starts happening, early 30s, 40s, 50s, boom.
Yeah. What's actually hard is that people don't know how to differentiate between just normal stressed state,
Yeah.
which is me. Sometimes, sometimes on a podcast, I'll forget the name of something. Does that mean I have MCI,
Right.
mild cognitive impairment? No,
Right.
just maybe I'm just stressed, right?
Right.
First symptoms start with forgetting names, street signs, forgetting where you put your keys. These are really early signs of mild cognitive impairment. And it begins, what we see is that it starts to begin in the 40s. And a lot of women start to experience this during the menopausal or perimenopausal stage of their life because of the estrogen, okay, which is a bioenergetic for the brain.
Yeah.
Think about this disease, or think about your brain cells as a business, right? And you're trying to sell something. You need to be able to feed the business what it needs, okay? But you need to be able to give it like what it doesn't need. So you've got to be able to feed it, and we'll talk about that. That's a part of the neurotropic factors.
Yeah.
You need to also release what it doesn't need.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you say, the decline in estrogen is really one of the reasons why women are more likely to get Alzheimer's disease?
Yes, that's what we're seeing.
Okay.
So estrogen is a hormone that is neuroprotective. So it protects the neurons against harmful threats. It feeds the neurons what it needs. So basically allows for the passive diffusion of other molecules that are really good for the brain. It helps the microglia as well. And the microglia is what protects the brain as well and is part of the immune system. So, yeah, that decline in estrogen is fierce. And what we're seeing now is that a lot of studies are showing that women who are taking hormone replacement therapy are not experiencing the cognitive decline.
Amazing.
Yeah, they're not experiencing volume loss. They're not experiencing what we call white matter intensities, hyperintensities, which is what we see on an MRI, which is where you see these clusters of the white matter just being fragmented.
I came across this really interesting meta-analysis, which I'm sure you have read. Diabetes, mellitus, and risk of dementia, a meta-analysis of prospective observational studies. Conclusions, the results showed a 73% risk of all-type dementia, 56% increase of Alzheimer's disease, and 127% increase in vascular dementia. I'm trying to remember the acronyms because in diabetes patients. So, for someone who, for example, is going through perimenopause or maybe has this gene, like what is the role of, and I know we don't need to get into nutrition per se, but just understanding the role of metabolism and where these risks kind of reside.
Yeah, so your brain has to be able to function at its optimum. It needs to be able to transfer lipids throughout the brain. It needs to be able to use and uptake certain nutrients. It needs to be able to halt nutrients in the brain, get rid of them, and that's what the blood-brain barrier is from. You mentioned something called vascular dementia. I want to touch on that because it relates to everything. So
you don't hear much about that. This is really kind of the first time that I
vascular dementia is another part,
Yeah.
but it actually pretty much is Alzheimer's disease. So your brain is the most vascular-rich organ in the entire body, meaning that it houses the most amount of blood vessels, which consists of arteries, which are these big pumps. You've got veins, and they're just like one-directional pumps. And then you've got these tiny little things called capillaries. And these capillaries are the first thing to go during Alzheimer's disease because they're tiny, they're one cell thick. And when we have even slight increases in our, like if we've got hypertension, for example, our blood pressure is a little bit high, slight increases, like anything over 120/80, if we're doing like 130/90, which seems to be the norm right now, right?
Yeah.
That increases your risk of vascular dementia because what it does is it causes the breakdown of these tiny little blood vessels. Now, what does blood do? Blood supplies the brain with oxygen and nutrients. Where does the blood come from? It comes from, evidently, the heart. So we've got the major blood vessel of the heart, which is the aorta, and the aorta connects to something called the two main blood supplies to the brain is the posterior region, you've got the anterior region, so you've got the carotid arteries on both sides, you've got the vertebral arteries, and then you've got branching off from those. So that's the major blood supply. First thing to go is the capillaries. So what happens when the capillaries go? Well, they don't feed the oxygen and nutrients to certain parts of the brain and the brain cells. So those cells and the connections around there die because they don't have anything to feed them. Then it starts to infiltrate everything else. Now, when we look at vascular dementia, we hear a lot about cardiovascular disease, and we hear about the dysfunctional system in the arteries, right? It's not just about the plaque buildup. It's about the arterial walls. They become thinner and dysfunctional, right? What is that due to? Well, it's due to what we're eating, metabolic dysfunction, inflammation. It's the same in the brain because they've got the exact same blood vessels. And these blood vessels have thick walls. They've got muscles because that's what they're meant to do, right? The same as the muscles in your legs. They're there to pump blood throughout the brain. So if they become dysfunctional, then the entire brain becomes dysfunctional. So that's where the theory comes from. So if you're protecting your brain with what you're eating, the Mediterranean diet, the ketogenic diet is probably the best diet, in my opinion, for brain health.
So I'm not a nutrition scientist by any means. Obviously, I'm relatively knowledgeable about kind of the impact of different foods that go into the body and how they kind of impact the system. But what do you think about kind of alternating between a Mediterranean diet and a ketogenic diet, and just kind of like alternating? Like that's kind of like how I function, but I don't know, and that's how I feel the best. But I don't know if that has any basis.
It's interesting, right? So I'm an omnivore. I eat a lot of red meat. Am I high fat, low carb? Probably, yes. Yeah. That's when we look at the ketogenic diet. I am now becoming so much more favorable in the ketogenic diet than ever before, not just because we've seen, whenever we see a patient with Alzheimer's disease, we immediately say, we want to put you on ketones, exogenous ketones, because your brain uses those better than glucose. Your body obviously uses it better. But I've just seen, and I'm actually posting a reel about this today or tomorrow, we've just seen a group out of Boston being able to shrink a glioblastoma via a ketogenic lifestyle. So one man who had an inoperable brain tumor was given either we can give you chemotherapy or we can give you put you on a ketogenic diet. And he shrunk his glioblastoma, his brain tumor, just by going deep into nutritional ketosis.
Explain what ketosis is.
It's where you're in a glucose-depleted state where your body and your brain has to then rely on ketones and ketone bodies. Now, can we get you in? What I'm looking at now is, what about if we've got somebody who is not in nutritional ketosis, they've still got some glucose in their system, but if we just pump them up with exogenous ketones, do we still get the same effect? And it turns out that you do. You can actually raise yourself into ketosis with the exogenous ketones.
I want to pause for a few minutes to talk about something fundamental. It's not flashy or complicated, but it is often overlooked in the conversations about performance, mindset, and recovery, and that is fuel. I often talk about sleep and recovery and about nervous system regulation and emotional resilience, but I think we need to understand that none of those systems at a foundational level can operate at full capacity if you are under-fueled. If your body doesn't have the raw materials it needs, it's going to start to make trade-offs. It's going to conserve, it's going to compromise, and the first things that are going to go will be your cognitive clarity, your emotional bandwidth, your motivation, and your capacity to recover. And if we're getting a little bit more specific, from a physiological standpoint, your body is constantly surveying your energy availability and whether or not you're in homeostasis. And it's asking questions like, is blood sugar level stable? Is blood pressure where it needs to be? Is your brain getting nutrients it needs to maintain executive function and mood regulation? Even slight dysregulation is going to have downstream effects on your heart rate variability, okay? So your ability to respond and adapt to external stress, which HRV is a measure of, your resting heart rate, okay, which is a really important marker of cardiovascular health, your deep sleep percentage, and ultimately your overall readiness to adapt to the demands of life. I see this in Whoop data all the time, but beyond the numbers, fueling well is about honoring the values that you say you care about. If you say presence matters to you, or being resilient emotionally and physically, or, the impact that you're having in your community or the world, then you have to consider how you're feeling your body, and understanding that how you feel your body is going to be what allows those traits to bubble to the surface. I truly understand that eating well it's not always easy, with travel and deadlines and caring for children and, long shifts, late nights. I truly do understand. I think even for myself, a lot of times real food and making a big meal feels out of reach. But we have more tools than ever before to simplify the complexity. We don't need to compromise. And for me, it's about establishing a baseline that is complete and consistent and convenient. In my opinion, fueling should remove friction from your day, not add to it. And that's why I'm such an advocate of nutritionally complete foods by my show sponsor, Huel. Its formulations are grounded in science, but I think what's really cool is that it still works with the human experience. Foods that prioritize protein, fiber, essential fats, and slow-burning carbohydrates. Foods that nourish, stabilize, and allow you to focus on the things that matter without constantly thinking about your next meal or crashing mid-afternoon. The one I often reach for is Huel Black Edition Ready to Drink. It's a nutritionally complete meal that was formulated by experts to have all the nutrients you need from one meal. It has 35 grams of protein plus 27 vitamins and minerals in every single bottle. It's also high in fiber and low in sugar. It's made with vitamin B12 for energy metabolism. It also saves me time, which I love. I can drink it on the go between meetings or after a workout. So here's an invitation from me. This week, I want you to audit the relationship between how you fuel and how you feel. I want you to track your energy, your mood, even your sleep, your ability to focus, and ask yourself each day, did I fuel in a way today that supports who I want to be? If the answer is no, then I'd like you to get curious. What might need to change? The more consistently you fuel with intention, the more capacity you'll have. Not just to perform, but most importantly, to live your values with joy and with energy. And ultimately, that is the goal. Okay, so let's get back to today's conversation with Dr. Louisa Nicola.
We need to rethink health in this country. And I think that's very clear. And I think that's what your mission is and what you're trying to do. Where does someone start?
Yeah. The best thing that we can be doing to push the needle forward to prevent this disease is exercise. I don't care what anybody says. In my opinion, it sits above nutritional interventions. It sits above sleep interventions for many reasons.
So taxonomy?
Yeah.
Exercise is literally number one.
But what is exercise? That's the thing is, we all hear about exercise. I think we need to change the nomenclature. And I don't like the word physical activity because I do look at 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds and they think physical activity is gardening. And while that is great, and I draw on the findings of my parents who I drill into every day and they tell me, but we did the gardening today. That is not exercise. Let's define exercise and what it is and what the findings are. So I'm going to split it up into three. I'm going to talk about aerobic exercise. I'm going to talk about resistance training. And then I'm going to talk about neurocognitive training. I call it neuroathletics.
Got it.
When I say aerobic training, I'm talking about anything all zones.
Okay, got
right?
it. Yeah.
Let's define that. I work on 5 functional zones. I don't know if you do. Is that how you define things?
Yeah,
So
zone 1 to 5.
Zone 1 is sedentary. You and I are in zone 1 right now.
Right.
Depending on how fit we are. If I was really obese, maybe I'd be in zone 2. But no, I'm in zone 1. Zone 2 is when we're just above zone 1. And we generally like to refer to this as 65% of our maximum heart rate. This is where I think we're going wrong, Kristen. Who knows their maximum heart rate? Their true maximum heart rate.
Yeah. I mean, do you need to get a VO2 max test in a lab with a metabolic cart?
With a metabolic cart, a crash cart, and a harness. Is that what it is? Where yeah, that's what I think should be.
Yeah.
People should be
I think
lighting towards.
you need to understand your baseline.
So that's the first thing. People don't know their maximum heart rate.
Yes.
So let's just call it, right? Let's talk about a talk test. How do we know if we're in zone 2? It's generally when you're running on a treadmill or walking on a treadmill and you can have a conversation, but you can't really finish that sentence. Like it's hard to have a conversation, but you can get it out. That's when you're generally in that zone 2 training zones. Where does Louisa train in? Louisa only trains in 2 zones. She's in zone 2 or zone 5. She's not spending time increasing her risk of injuries, increasing inflammation, increasing cortisol in zone 3 and zone 4. I think that they're pathetic zones.
So a lot of the high intensity interval training, that's where you will likely reside if you're not doing this polarized kind of training.
I know. Yeah.
So, and that's
just why I've got a
majority of people kind of sit. And it doesn't mean that maybe that exercise isn't having some sort of benefit. Truly, it is. But in terms of if you're going to do it right.
Yeah.
And if you want to protect your brain.
It's so much easier for you. Who wants to go to Orange Theory and slam their legs every day? I've only just started to have knee problems, which is now I'm starting to think about my age.
I know. Yeah, it's a good forcing function.
Yeah.
But I think folks have to understand that if you're going to be spending time in the gym, you might as well do it with the idea that I'm going to actually protect my brain.
Correct. I'm going to protect my brain. I'm going to protect my body. I'm going to protect my joints of my knees, etc. So in zone 2, when we're doing these long runs, right, when you're able to sustain 65% for an hour or so, you're doing so many different things, right? When we talk about the brain, we release brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. This here, I have figured out, BDNF is like the prefrontal cortex. It is the master controller of all the myokines. So we're doing our long run. We're releasing BDNF. BDNF is responsible. It is a growth factor for the brain. We have seen in human studies, and of course, rat studies, the first ever study that was done to show this was in 1961. Marion Diamond actually put rats in an enriched environment. So they put a cohort group, and then they put a control group. They put these rats in with wheels and like fun things to do. And what they showed was that they released all of this BDNF just from wheel running. That BDNF increased the brain size, right? And it also increased the hippocampus size. So that's when we first knew that BDNF is doing something for the brain. When we look at it in humans, what we found is that BDNF can improve the anterior part of the hippocampus, and we can actually grow new neurons in the hippocampus. So BDNF promotes the creation of new brain cells within the hippocampal region of the brain. What do we know about the hippocampus? It is the first thing to shrink during Alzheimer's disease. If that's what stores our memories and that starts to shrink, that's the earliest signs of hippocampal impairment, caudate nucleus impairment, but this is also why we start to forget things, right? So we can stop that through BDNF, and BDNF is produced during our long runs. Does that make sense so far?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to keep moving on. What else does aerobic activity do? What happens? Well, we get a sustained profusion of blood through the body. We get a lot of blood plumping out through the body for long periods of time. Your heart rate is at that 65% zone, so it's above your resting heart rate. So we're just getting a bolus of nutrients and oxygen to the brain constantly.
So regardless of age,
regardless of age.
Zone 2.
Yeah.
Helpful.
Everyone's zone 2 is different.
Women, men.
Yes, both for men and both for women.
Agree.
Yeah. You're also training the mitochondria. The mitochondria produce energy through ATP, and this is where you're getting the biggest bang for your buck.
Yep. So basically for zone 2, you have to be able to talk. So do the talk test, and you want to sustain it for about 40 to 60 minutes.
Yeah. I usually say sweet spot is 45 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So definitely 45 minutes plus.
Yeah.
And a couple times a week.
Yeah. 3 times a week.
3 times a week.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Then we move up and we go into anaerobic, the zone. So this is your zone 5. I call this the death zone. You're at around 90 to 95% of your maximum heart rate. Most people aren't getting there.
Yeah.
You should get there around 20 minutes a week, in my opinion. If you want to do 30 or 40 minutes, great. What we see is improvements in VO2 max. So VO2 max is by far the strongest predictor of longevity and all-cause mortality. It's a measure of our peak cardiorespiratory fitness, how well your lungs are able to deliver oxygen to the rest of the body at maximal capacity, right? When you're at that zone, you're doing many things. One, you are increasing the structure or improving the structure of your heart. So did you see that study by Dr. Ben Levine?
I did.
Yeah, where he took a bunch of 50-year-olds and he reversed their heart sizes, or he reversed the age-related decline in their hearts by 20 years, effectively giving them a 30-year-old's heart.
In how much time?
2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, that was amazing.
That was amazing.
2 years sounds like a long time to folks, but reversing your age by 20 years, your biological age, I mean, that is.
Yeah. So I first authored a study which was based on all of this. And what we found was that all minimum required dose to improve cognitive function and reverse 2 years of cognitive dysfunction is you just have to stick to 2 days a week at minimum.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And
of aerobic training.
Training. So either zone 2 or zone 5.
Correct.
Any combination.
Any combination.
2 times per week.
Yeah. Minimum. I try and say just get up of that minimum.
So if we just zoom out for folks listening who have spent a lot of time in a sedentary lifestyle, 2 times per week seems really doable. And would you recommend, I mean, for folks who have never really exercised, just getting out and walking to start?
But that would be their zone 2.
Yeah.
If you're sedentary, your zone 2 is getting up and doing a walk around the block.
Right.
This is actually for young people as well. I go to the gym every day. I was an athlete. I've done various VO2 max tests. This is back when no one was talking about 20 years ago,
I know.
which shows my age. Yeah. But I see a lot of men and women, I'm not going to just categorize females, thinking they're in zone 5, but they're not. Yeah. Zone 5 is torturous. Yeah. It's scary because you actually think you're going to have a heart attack. When I was a triathlete, we'd call them sting sessions or spew sessions. Yeah. Because that's how you'd want to feel. Do you have to do this for 20 minutes at one time? No. You do this, I do 4x4. You can do 2x2 if you want. Just get in that zone.
So 4x4, 4 minutes as hard as you can, 4 minutes off,
complete
times
rest.
4.
Times 4.
Right.
And so that's 16 minutes on, 16 minutes off.
Absolute torture.
It is torture. And it builds mental strength too.
For sure.
Because you have to tell yourself to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah.
This will impress people. There was this wonderful study that was done that actually showed that you can eliminate, remember how I mentioned circulating tumor cells?
Yes.
So when you're at that zone 5 rate, you're getting shear stress. So you're getting the shunting of this blood just through the arteries, right? Because it's just like perfusing blood. So you get these it's called shear stress. Because of that, they worked on this with patients who had prostate cancer, and they found that 90% of the circulating tumor cells were eliminated within 4 hours of getting in that zone 5.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So you can actually obliterate all of the circulating tumor cells, 90% of them, through the sheer force of blood shunting through the system.
That's wild.
So you're not just improving heart health, you're also improving cancer outcomes.
Wow.
So let's now move on to resistance training, which is my main area of research. And I first authored a paper that looked into the effects of resistance training on mild cognitive impairment. And I mentioned earlier BDNF being the key player, the master regulator, basically the president of all of the myokines. So during resistance training, this is what makes it so beautiful. Yeah. Muscle architecture and the brain has this close relationship, right? The more muscle you have, the better the brain health, right? We know this because we know that muscle is a storage sink for glucose. We know that muscle is an endocrine organ, so it secretes myokines, muscle-based proteins. These myokines, when you contract your muscle and the fibers in your muscle, the muscle cells release these myokines, right?
Now just explain what a myokine is, because I know you have that's kind of your love language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a protein, and they're found only in the cells of the muscles. And we can use these proteins. We have receptors on our body. Think of Lego. You know how Lego attaches to each other? We have receptors on our body, not on every organ, but a lot of them. We've got them on our skin, on the pancreas, In men, they're on the prostate, they're in our heart, and they're, of course, in our brain. And these receptors, once they're activated, they do beneficial things for that organ. For example, when we exercise, we release a myokine called irisin. And irisin comes from the Greek word for iris, and he was a messenger to the god. It was a Greek god. And that's what irisin does. Irisin's wonderful because irisin crosses the blood-brain barrier. BDNF doesn't. BDNF actually happens peripherally. BDNF acts on the vagus nerve. Yeah, and it's got a different type of effect. But irisin, when it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it helps BDNF express itself. So it basically is like a steroid boost for BDNF. You've got irisin that gets excreted. You've got interleukin-6, which is the most studied myokine. The first one out of Bente Peterson was the one who found this to be an anti-inflammatory cytokine.
I love that. So taxonomy, exercise, resistance training, aerobic. What is next on your list?
So once we've gotten the exercise, I also mentioned neurocognitive training. So that's where you're doing anything that's really going to stress the brain. By the way, you always stress your brain when you're lifting heavy and when you're exercising. But just like your muscles don't grow unless you place the stimulus under stress, the same as your brain. So I always like to tell people, just get 2 balls, throw them to the wall, work on your reaction time, your processing speed, and your visual acuity, and just get used to hand-eye coordination drills, reaction training. This is why racket balls and racket sports are really good. Pickleball.
That's why it's like so correlated with longevity, like all racket sports.
Yeah. So moving on from that, if I had to take a broad helicopter view and look at everything, if I nail it down to inflammation, right, which is what's in really activating the innate immune system to release amyloid, then we have to maintain a good environment that's not going to put us in a stressful state. So obviously sleep is going to do that. Good nutrition, good hydration. Your neurons actually have to function using something called a sodium-potassium pump. That's how we produce what we call a synapse. It's an electrical firing of 2 neurons together, which creates our thoughts, our movement patterns. This is generated using sodium, potassium. Your brain needs all of these electrolytes in order to function. So maintaining a good hydration status. I think we overlook social relationships. We know that there was a 100-year follow-up study out of Harvard that showed that those with healthy brains were ones who maintained strong relationships. Yeah. Doesn't mean having a romantic relationship. It's with the people in your network. Yeah. And as I get older and move throughout these years and learn more about the brain, I'm protecting the people that I spend my time with as well. Look at the people around you. You are what you follow on Instagram. So if you're constantly following negative things, the news, and this is putting and activating your sympathetic nervous system, then turn it off. Yeah. Things like that. I'm getting more into quiet zones throughout the day. Yeah. Some people call this meditation. Yeah. I just really close my eyes and trying to just decompress and activate this parasympathetic nervous system. Love that. But really setting your brain up for success. And the way that you're going to do that is feeding it what it needs.
I've discovered a game-changing beauty device, and I'm not gatekeeping. It's the red light face mask from this show's partner, Bone Charge. For those who are new to red light therapy or near infrared, it works by penetrating deep into the skin to boost collagen production, reduce inflammation, and smooth fine lines, wrinkles, and scars. I've only used it for a few weeks, but I'm already seeing improved texture and a bit more firmness. These are, just kind of preliminary data, but so far, so good. And what makes it stand out for me is that it's cordless. I can literally make pancakes for my kids while wearing the mask. What's also unique about Bone Charge that I love is that it has more LEDs than any other brands, offering better coverage and optimized treatments. Check out Bone Charge's face mask or explore the rest of their amazing products to aid your health and wellness journey. Head to bondcharge.com/Kristen, and for a sneaky 15% off code, use Kristen at checkout. Discount applies site-wide. You'll also get free shipping and a 1-year warranty. Head to bondcharge.com/Kristen now.
Okay, so we just talked about like the primary promoters. Now I want you to talk about creatine, omega-3s, any other supplements that you feel like are really central. And then if we can hit on briefly alcohol,
Mm.
recreational drugs, and sugar.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the supplements. Okay.
I mean, creatine is really compelling.
It's very compelling. It's very in right now.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so funny because it's
something that we've been using for 30 years. It's the most widely studied supplement on the market, the safest one.
Behind caffeine.
Correct. Creatine is naturally occurring, produced in the liver. We have small forms of it. And what we know is that it's involved in cell energy metabolism. So it helps with the regeneration of adenine triphosphate, which is the ATP, which is our main source of energy within the cell and the mitochondria. And we know that mitochondria can become dysfunctional over time. And who doesn't want more energy and who doesn't want to produce energy better? So widely considered a bro supplement, we now have evidence that it is substantially beneficial for females and for everybody. Doesn't matter what age.
I mean, kids, there's really, you saw that study on the kids with the brain trauma?
Yeah, concussions, TBIs. Yeah.
It's just wild.
So we can talk about that because what they did was they actually dosed them. It was a high dose. I think it was 20 grams.
Higher. I think it was higher.
Was it higher than 20 grams?
Yeah, I think it was 30.
It's high. For caveats, there has been no studies. The study that showed is the biggest myth of all is that it creates hair loss because it increases DHT. That study was actually retracted. So it doesn't increase DHT. It does not create hair loss. It also doesn't cause kidney dysfunction. You may see an elevation in creatinine levels. It doesn't mean that anything is off.
Right, that's not
blood.
harmful.
No, it's not harmful at all.
Creatinine, yeah.
There was a great study that Dr. Kandau, I think, Darren Kandau done, where he put females, perimenopause, I think they're around 45 to 48 years old, 2 years of daily creatine of 5 grams a day. There was no signs of dysfunction in anything. There was no side effects. What did happen was they increased their bone mass, bone mineral density, and their muscle mass.
Incredible.
Why is that? Because when you produce more energy, because it literally also forces, you may look a bit more bloated because it does force the water into the cell, but that's so you can improve the muscle contraction, which we also need, by the way, magnesium in order to produce a muscle contraction. So you want to make sure that you've got magnesium. But top tier supplements for me is whey protein, omega-3 fatty acids, and creatine. So we've got the creatine. I think every woman should be taking creatine, starting at 5 grams a day, right? And moving on from that.
And for people who don't tolerate it well, just split it up. 2 in the morning, 2 at night.
Correct. It doesn't matter if you have it around training or it does not matter. Yeah. Okay. The bioavailability of creatine from sources such as red meat isn't that high. You'd have to eat to get 5 grams a day. You'd have to have a lot of red meat. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Next on the list is omega-3 fatty acids, which come from fatty fish such as salmon and mackerel, sardines. By far, people think for some reason, every time I put this on Instagram, they think that I work for some sort of fish company or a creatine company, right? Yeah. Because I tout the benefits are just so astronomical. Omega-3 fatty acids literally act like an FDA-approved drug for the body. Yeah. They downregulate inflammation. Yeah. They help with cell membrane fluidity. They help with getting rid of the amyloid in the brain. We know that it actually can help with increases in muscle mass. Yeah. We also know that people in the US, so Dr. Bill Harris formulated something called the omega-3 index, which measures the amount of omega-3 in a red blood cell. Anyone can get this done. It's just a pinprick test. If you have an omega-3 fatty acid level or an omega index of 8% or more, you have increased your life expectancy by 5 years. I just got mine done. I do it every year. In January, mine's at 11.3%. Let's go. I mean, I'm just so happy about that.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just, even for women who are trying to preserve their egg quality over time, they're even showing now that omega-3 index improves egg quality with women who have got diminished ovarian reserve over the age of 40. So that's another great way to take it. Honestly, best thing for you to do. Yeah. 2 grams of each per day.
That has been, I guess like 3 years ago, I started really dialing in on just not getting it from supplements. I don't even take supplements. I get it all through my food. And that's literally just buy a can of mackerel a day, I pretty much kind of get myself there.
Yeah. And go and test for it and see where you're at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually never been, I don't think I've never had that test. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna do that.
And 4% is what the average population is right now, omega-3 index, which raises your risk of all-cause mortality. So, yeah, it's actually on the same spectrum of a pack-a-day smoker, having a low omega-3 index of 4%. Yeah, so really honing in on that. So that's my top, and make sure you're getting it from a reputable company, know where it's sourced and the quality of the products, because a lot of these omega-3s can be rancid.
Yes. How do we know?
The smell, the taste, if you've got that tissue, fishy, yeah.
Okay. Very good.
And then whey protein would probably be my my last top three. Yeah, we know that currently I'm trying to maintain 1 gram per pound of protein per day.
Yeah.
I mainly get that from food sources, but I do every day. I transparently, I do have around 30 grams of whey protein.
Yeah.
Because I can't do it through food.
I'm the40
It's like 140 grams, I think, a day. So, yeah, they're my top 3 supplements. When it comes to alcohol, right? Because I think that a lot of people do question whether it's good for you, whether it's bad for you. And the evidence isn't compelling to whether it's good for you. However, it's not showing that also one glass a week is detrimental to your health, right? So, yes, we've seen a wonderful study with the UK Biobank that showed that you've got white matter disruptions. So those white matter intensities, as I mentioned, white matter atrophy, and you've also got gray matter atrophy when you have for moderate drinkers, which I think for women is around 7 drinks a week, right? So what is this actually doing? Well, when you ingest alcohol, you ingest ethanol, and ethanol ends up turning into acetaldehyde, and acetaldehyde is pretty much toxic waste, or it's extremely bad. It's poison for the body.
What's so dangerous about it is that it doesn't just attach to the cell; it can actually get inside the cell, which is really why it's so detrimental. It
gets into the cell, and this is what gets us into the state of whatever you're trying to get into. Right. But I don't think that's like, surely we know, surely we all know this, right? That it's poison. But in science, when you really understand the molecular processes of everything that's happening, you understand that everything evolves on a cycle. When you drink, you see disruptions in sleep. When you see disruptions in sleep, you don't get the glymphatic system activation. When you don't get that system activated, you wake up, you've got brain fog, you've got less energy, maybe you're more prone to eating.
You're not dropping into, even though you feel passed out, you're not dropping into the gym. First stages of sleep.
Yeah.
And you're not dropping into the gym either.
You're not going into the gym. You're not feeling good. That then affects your next day performance. Yep. It affects what you're going to do that following night as well. Eat. Yeah. You also put yourself in a dehydrated state. And then who knows the state that you're getting into whilst you're in that zone of drinking. You also signal areas to the brain that I feel good in this euphoric state, I'm going to keep drinking. Yeah. I'm trying to get people out of the state of thinking that a glass of wine at night to de-stress is normal.
Right.
I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get it. But it's not, I think we need better ways of managing that. So all in all, my stance is it's not the best for you, but if you're having 1 drink a week, it's not going to kill you.
Right. Great.
And then when we look at your last question was around sugar. I'm guessing you're referring to refined sugar and what that's doing. And we know that that's doing all sorts of havocs, like raising our inflammatory state. It's definitely not good for our brain because that's not how we process. That's not how our brain is. Our brain cells are actually utilizing fuel effectively. For me, I try and maintain a very, very low amount of refined sugars as possible. I also don't try and get this in the form of like fruit juices as well.
Does that put our brain in a state of stress?
It does, because you've got to think about the glycemic index. When we're raising and we're getting these sharp spikes in our blood glucose, it's the same as what it's doing to your body. And these spikes, right, it's actually worse for you and the lining of your arteries than if you're just maintaining a consistent blood sugar level. Yeah.
Final question, and I'm not sure if you have a stance on this, but oral health.
Oral health is a big one
in the brain,
and it's actually one of periodontal disease can be a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, but also a heart attack or a stroke, depending on if you're getting to the stage of where you've formed a actual infection. That is because you've got a pathway where these tiny little pathogens can seep through the gums and go up through the nerves into the brain. And that can definitely cause buildup of amyloid and can cause, actually, in some cases, an embolism in the heart.
Gosh.
Yeah, which is a heart attack. Yeah.
Yeah. I ask every guest this question. What does being human mean to you?
Wow, that's a really great question. Being human to me means living out everything that you are, the good, the bad, the ugly. That's what it is to have a human experience, connecting with others on every level possible and being as close to nature as possible. I have this theory that the further away you move from nature, the further away you move from being a human, and the closer you get to moving closer towards disease. So I think human is just, every time you say human, I think of my grandmother who, she was my best friend. Her name was Louisa as well. And she brought me up, and she lived as, she was the most human person that I ever saw, from emotions to her, the way she spoke to other people and her giving nature.
Thank you for everything you're bringing to the world, not just the science, but just your way of being in the world, I think is really special. It's so unique because you're literally just yourself. I just really appreciate people who are, I hate the word authentic because I feel like it's just overused. But I think you just seem as though you're really true to yourself. And I think that comes through loud and clear. And I know I'm not the only one who appreciates that. So thank you for just being you and everything that you're bringing to the world.
Thank you. I can say this exact same for you. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for what you're doing in the world as well.
I've got exciting news to share about the company I work for and our show sponsor, Whoop. We have just launched the all-new Whoop. I have worked at Whoop for 9 years, and I could not be more excited about this generation. It's 7% smaller and now has 14 plus days of battery life, 2 weeks without having to charge this. Whoop medical grade now includes heart screener with on-demand ECG readings, meaning you can check in on your heart at any time and share those results with your doctor. The Whoop app also now includes a brand new feature called HealthSpan. And what HealthSpan does is it basically is an entry point into coaching, in that it will show you exactly how your daily habits impact your pace of aging. Whoop is designed to help you improve your performance, longevity, and overall health. Visit join.whoop/science to try out the all-new Whoop and get a free month on me. That's join.whoop/science